All right, everyone. Thank you for coming out to this Silicon Slopes Consumer Chapter meetup. The topic today is tariffs, which, if you pay attention to anything in the news, it's a hot topic, and I think a topic that's actually really important for any consumer brand, anyone who's selling product, moving product, importing product. And so we're excited to have these two experts with us on this panel. Before we do that, though, we want to first thank Silicon Slopes for letting us use this facility, for the streaming, for all the technology, and then we'd also like to thank Klugonics, and we'll have Noah come up and give a little intro, but they are the sponsor for lunch today. So Noah, let's have you come up and give an intro.
Cool. Thank you so much. And honored to be the lunch sponsor today. So just really quick, I mean, tariffs it's such a, it impacts so many of our clients. So we are a design and development firm located in West Valley. We do a variety of products from baby goods, outdoor equipment and apparel, a lot of home goods. And we manage, it's end-to-end, so that product design development, but also the manufacturing overseas. A lot of it's in Asia. So we've had so many clients lately come to us, and really it started back in 2019, but so many people coming to us, please get us out of China. Tariffs are getting crazy. So this is obviously a very relevant event. And yeah, I'm excited to be here, and thank you for thinking of us.
Thanks again, Noah. All right, so I'd like to just introduce the panelists briefly here. I'll have them introduce themselves, but I'll just do, name them by name, I guess. But on my furthest to the right is Dalen Bushman. Dalen is the COO of Gosney. If you haven't had a pizza in a Gosney oven, you are missing out. You need to go solve that ASAP. Fantastic product, fantastic business. Dalen brings a world of expertise, so I'll let Dalen introduce himself briefly before I introduce Bryce.
Great, thanks, Dalen Bushman. As mentioned, COO of Gosney. I've worked for several companies in the food industry for about 10 years, and then moved over to a company up in Park City called Skull Candy. Enjoyed that, did that for quite some time, actually, and then jumped from Skull Candy to a company called Goal Zero, and that's where I really had my first introduction into tariffs and opportunities to play around with that. We did a lot of solar panel stuff, so there was a lot of things happening with solar and tariffs and things like that. Moved from Goal Zero to a company called Traeger, and was there for about 5 years. Loved barbecue, grew up in West Texas, so that was a perfect fit for me. Enjoyed that ride, jumped from there and started my own consulting business back in 2019, I think, 2018, 2019, and enjoyed helping a lot of small businesses in Utah on the operations side. I love seeing businesses grow, and it was awesome to help them. One of my clients was a small company out of the UK called Gosney, building pizza ovens, and after 6 or 7, 9 months of consulting with them, they came over and asked me to jump on full time. So doing that, that takes up the majority of my business. Still enjoy helping other companies and playing around with them a little bit too, but yeah, happy to be here.
Thanks again, Dalen. And then to my immediate right is Bryce Judy. He's the founder of TerraFlow. I'll let him introduce himself as well.
Yeah, my name is Bryce Judy. So I started kind of my intro into the tariff world working for KPMG and Trade and Customs. I would contract with medical device manufacturers, Dick's Sporting Goods, places like that, specifically focused on assigning tariff codes, which kind of leads to, all of how much you're going to pay at the border and regulatory compliance documents based on that. So after leaving there, I met my co-founder. We decided that we wanted to automate the process of doing tariff classifications, and TerraFlow was born. So we can do what my entire team used to be able to do at KPMG in a year in about 10 minutes at a higher accuracy rate. So we do audits for HTS codes. We identify where your company has compliance risks or overpayment on tariffs.
Very cool. Like I said, we've got the experts here, so it'll be good to dive into the topic. So with that, let's jump right in. And we probably have a wide range of knowledge. I think, again, we've probably all seen the news and heard the word tariff. But to just kind of set the playing field, let's have you two kind of walk us through some key terms that we hear often. So those would be tariffs, duties, customs, kind of what are they? We can start with you, Bryce, and Dan, you can kind of follow on to that, but kind of help set the stage of what these terms are and how they interact.
Yeah, so tariffs are these rates that get assigned to your goods based on its classification. So that's how much you're going to have to pay in duties at the border. So for example, you're importing a medical device, it's a 2% tariff rate, and then your duty is going to be, the value of your goods, 2% of that you're going to pay. Duties also encompass things like anti-dumping, countervailing duties, which are, these subsidies that are given by certain countries to reduce the costs, and then our government comes in, adds on extra duties to bring those back up to fair market value.
Dalen, anything? Yeah, okay, well no. And here's the next question, and this, we don't want to make this be a political discussion, so maybe it's a little bit riskier for people taking the mic on this, but if we dive into tariffs, can either of you explain how they're being used, what Trump's trying to accomplish, or kind of what the country tries to accomplish with tariffs? What is their role?
Yeah, I think there's a couple different reasons why we have tariffs, right? So one, it's a revenue mechanism for the federal government. Not as much as I would have thought. I think the latest number I saw was about 2.7% of what the government brings in is from tariffs. So not a huge amount. That's doubling and tripling every day, it seems like. But so there's a revenue mechanism there. It's also a negotiation tactic. We saw that play out recently with Canada and Mexico, where President Trump has asked them for some things and dropped these tariffs on them, and we saw some pretty quick reaction to that. And it hasn't just been recently. I mean, he's used these tactics, and other presidents have used these tactics for years. And then, it's just another way for, policy implementation. So obviously, President Trump has wanted to bring manufacturing back to the U.S., and that's one of his big calling cards. And adding these tariffs is part of his way to do that.
Perfect. And then the follow-up to that is, I've read several articles that tariffs are on, tariffs are off, they're on pause, they're not. What's the latest? Do we know what the latest is on where we stand today with the tariffs?
Yeah, so I've actually got a full list of all the ones that have been announced, when they're gonna be put into effect. If you'd like me to run through those real quick.
Yeah, that'd be great.
All right, perfect. Let me get that out. There are a lot of dates, and they're always changing, so got to keep notes on them. All right, so the announcement of the External Revenue Service was on January 20th. That will go into effect April 1st, which is assigned specifically to the collection of tariffs. February 4th was announced the additional 10% duties on tariffs for China, and those are in effect currently as of the 4th. I guess they were announced the 1st, and they went into effect the 4th. The de minimis announcement, which was originally put into effect on the 4th, is delayed now until we have the infrastructure to be able to handle that. And that basically just any Type 86 entries, which are just under $800 in value, those coming in from China or country of origin China, were given that additional, they had to enter in through a formal entry process rather than how they were able to before. Mexico and Canada is delayed until March 4th. Those are extra 25%. And then steel and aluminum goods goes into effect March 12th. And then reciprocal tariffs are going to be announced April 1st. So a lot of big things coming up.
Yeah, a lot. It definitely sounds like a lot to keep track of. And obviously, things can probably still change, would be my guess, just depending on how negotiations go. So it's good. It's an ever-moving, the goalposts keep moving. So again, important topic to keep on top of. Okay, so let's dive into strategy. I think that's probably why we're all here is, these seem like they're going to be here. They seem like going to have an impact. What do we do about them? So I think the first question there is, are there government programs that help you get around tariffs or get reduced tariffs? Are there, and again, we can open this up more broadly to say, are there other strategies that we can employ as business owners, as brands, as operators to help keep these tariffs down, reduced, or even eliminated?
Yeah, that's the golden question, right? Eliminated? No, I don't think so anymore. There used to be exemptions that different companies could utilize for various things. It's been pretty clear that they're not into the exemption process anymore, they being the government. So we used to be able to, with Ghazni, we used to be able to participate in some of the exemption statuses, and those went away last July, which increased or jumped our tariffs to the 25%. They have the 7.5%, 15%, 25%, various ones. We went to the 25%. And even prior to that, just based on some of the political turmoil and some of the things in the news with China and Taiwan and Russia and Ukraine and some of the things going on there, we had already started looking at various options. Some of those options were also in Asia. We'd been to Thailand and Malaysia and Singapore and Cambodia, also Mexico, looking at the near shore, looking at some things we could do here. And so we had started that process a couple of years ago. We partnered actually with one of our factories to build a manufacturing facility in Cambodia. They purchased the land and built a factory. I was just over there last week actually, looking at that, and they're kicking it off now. So that was fortuitous that we were able to have that already in the works prior to a lot of these other tariffs or additional tariffs being added. So from a strategic standpoint, I think there's a couple things. Obviously resourcing or looking at other opportunities or other manufacturing partners, negotiations with your current suppliers. We start that immediately when we hear of things that are happening. How can we share this burden, right? Because it is a burden. And then there's a pricing strategy as well, which I think a lot of companies initially went towards, including Ghazni, where you raise the price that the consumers are seeing, and ultimately the consumer will pay some of that tariff burden. From our perspective, we try to keep the price as competitive as possible. And so that means that we have to do a lot more on the sourcing, manufacturing side. As mentioned, we're currently looking at Cambodia. We have facilities in Vietnam. We're looking at Mexico, and we're looking here in the U.S. as well. It's super difficult for our type product within the U.S. just with the labor costs are extremely high. But we're looking at all options. I don't think there is a single solution. I think there's multiple opportunities and multiple options.
Yeah, I haven't heard a whole lot of companies talk about actually negotiating prices with the manufacturer. Obviously, it depends on volumes, but are you finding that they're at least open to those discussions and willing to help carry some of that burden?
Yeah, I've always been a firm believer in positive relationships. It has to be cliche, but it has to be win-win for everybody, right? And so I'm not one of those who beats my fists and demands a price. I want them to make margin. I want us to make margin. And I want it to be healthy for both, because if I'm beating them up too much, they're not going to want to work for me. I typically am working on higher quality products, and I want their staff to be able to manufacture these high quality products. And so they need to have the resources and staff they need. And so, we always have a very good relationship with our factories. When it comes to this, I'm always very transparent as well. We know exactly what their costs are. We know exactly what their margins are, and they know exactly what our costs and margins are. So we're always open book. And when it comes to these type tariffs, we're working with them on solutions as well. And so looking at negotiating with them, hey, this is what this new 10%, it's hitting us. Okay, now we have a 35% tariff. what can we do together to actually mitigate some of these costs? Where can you cut, or where do we have to cut, and how do we come together to get that?
That's great, Bryce. Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, for sure. So kind of on the actual like customs classification, HTS code side of things, a lot of times there are a lot of either cost savings or compliance risks within your current supply chain without you even realizing it. So we just did an audit. We do free audits for companies on all of their SKUs to identify where they're overpaying, where they're underpaying, that type of thing. So we just finished one with a medical device manufacturer. Something we identified very quickly was they do a lot of like braces for your arm or leg or whatever if you get injured. And their manufacturer gave them these codes that are very general. So it was just like other goods of plastic is how they had classified it. So if you're importing that from China, your rates are about 6%, first off for the general one. There's an extra 25%, and then there's an extra 10%. So you're paying, your 30-something% of is what your tariff rate's gonna be for this. So we go through and we actually look, and it's excluded specifically in those notes that they hadn't realized. So it should actually be classified as under the medical device and instruments category. So we were able to immediately identify that they were overpaying. We reduced it. It was a free rate, no extra, and then plus the 10% for China. So that reduced it from a 30, I think it was like 35, 37% tariff rate down to a 10% one. So a lot of companies have these risks or these overpayments in their supply chain without even realizing it. And so I think kind of first off is doing an audit and seeing, are you overpaying? And then second off would be you can start looking at, programs like the first trade program, or first sale program, I mean. You can look at duty drawback. And there are different ways that you can help offset these costs long term, especially if you're shipping out of the U.S. to customers outside of the U.S. afterwards.
Can you just explain a little bit more about duty drawback is for those who haven't seen that term yet?
Yeah, for sure. So duty drawback is it's with the government where you're shipping goods into the United States and then you're shipping them either out or you're destroying them. So, for example, I'm assembling medical devices here and I get my parts for that from China. So those goods come in, I'm paying my original duties on those as they come into the United States. And then I get that finished good and I'm shipping it out to other markets. So with this program, you're able to get 99% of those duties that you paid for those initial shipments into the US. You can get those back. And this is something that a lot of people don't really go through with because there's a lot of paperwork involved, but the potential cost savings, especially if you have a lot of, not just domestic but international shipping and exports that you could save.
Great. This is kind of an unprepared question, but just diving down a little bit deeper, what does the government have in place to verify that the documentation is correct? So for example, if the cost of this that we're paying is $30, but the manufacturer says it's $20 and there's a $10 services fee, how does what's the take on is that okay? Is that a viable solution to at least lower your tariffs in some form?
Honestly, I'm not sure how to answer that correctly. I've kind of heard on both sides. It's a pretty common practice that people do is, they have this kind of, design fee that they're paying to the manufacturer to reduce their unit cost, to get cheaper duties. Honestly, that's not, a legal business practice, but how you're actually able to audit, how the government could actually audit that, I'm not sure. So.
Yeah, I just had to throw that one out there.
Yeah, love it.
So maybe we scratch that one from the video. Just joking. All right, so let's see here. Again, we've kind of walked through some of these solutions. In general, do you have any thoughts on price increases to the consumer? So I think, Dylan, you kind of already mentioned it. You try to keep things flat, but as you kind of balance out these options, the options are you shift your manufacturing to a different country that doesn't have the tariffs, you renegotiate with your manufacturer, or you increase prices. It sounds like those are the three. Any other thoughts around as you consider prices? Is the general public aware enough to know, hey, prices might go up, and so I'm okay with this, or any other insights into price increases?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the general public wasn't as understanding or informed a couple years ago. I definitely think they are more now, and I think they're open to it. I don't know if they've necessarily accepted it or are accepting of it, but I think they're definitely open to it, and I think they're, you're having to run a business, right? The margin is the margin, and there's certain lines that you have to get to, and that's the things that we look at. I loved what he said about the audit of the HTS codes. We did that and saved several hundreds of thousands of dollars a couple years ago when we first came into the business. But when you've done everything that you can do and you look at your P&L and you're still not where you need to be, then you have to make those decisions. And I think because the tariffs have been so top of mind, people know and are aware, and I think most people are aware that it's kind of a negative thing to them, as it is to us as business owners. Maybe not as much to the government, but and just on the solution part, there's, with the universal tariffs that have been discussed and talked about, it's hard to understand or hard to know if, a Vietnam is a viable option or if a Mexico is a viable option, because there may be tariffs there sooner than later as well. I have some good friends at Expeditors who shared some information with me just a couple days ago with the largest trade surplus countries and where they're at. And you look at some of those and, those are obviously targeted right now, the ones that are higher on the list. And so strategically, do you look for somebody who's lower on that list, or do you just anticipate it's going to be universal anyway, and so you just find somebody that can produce what you need produced? There's so many variables right now that it's hard to really understand where to go.
It almost feels like a little bit of a whack-a-mole type scenario where you're guessing kind of where you need to be, and you hope that it's considered safer.
That's right.
So getting back to kind of the HTS codes and reclassifications, I mean, on average, do you have any data on how much people are saving or maybe needing to overpay based on a typical audit? Like how often are companies doing it correctly, and what's the financial impact?
Yeah, so the only country that's actually done like an actual audit and identified how many are actually signing the correct codes was Canada. And Canada ended up with 80% of them, they said, were being imported correctly, 20% were not. So since we built this system and our alignment with customs in our latest benchmark is 95%. So basically, you send the same product to us and you send it to customs, we're going to come up with the final 10-digit code 95% of the time the same. And when we're doing these audits, we're seeing more than 80% incorrect code assignment with the companies that we've been auditing. And so that means, depending on the company, they could either be massively overpaying or massively underpaying on these. And it really just depends on the company there. But one of the companies that we did this audit for, they did the audit because they just received a $200,000 fine for one of the goods that they were underpaying on. And so it's kind of a tough thing because you don't really know until you get audited, and then it's like it becomes a big issue. And that's why you kind of have to be proactive with this.
I think that to the point earlier, or the question earlier that you're making too, with CBP and their staff, they're probably understaffed, and they're probably not as efficient as they could be. But if something happens and they do audit you and you are found liable, they can put a death sentence on imports. And so you have to make sure that what you're doing, you can back it up, and you have the documentation or whatever's needed to ensure that if they do audit you, you're not getting shut off because you're trying to do funny business.
Yeah, it feels like the negative aspects of that are pretty severe. Are there specific industries or product categories that are more sensitive or vulnerable? I guess you kind of walked through the list a little bit, but is there anything else you'd like to add to to kind of how people are thinking about their products, and also any thoughts around actually re-engineering a product? Is that a good strategy? Is that helpful?
Yeah, for sure. Steel and aluminum are the top ones. Those are the ones that Trump has been really focusing on. Our pizza ovens have a steel core, and so we get hit with those. And yes, we have looked at opportunities to re-engineer. How can we make it without this? But again, you look at various products. Outdoor cooking, for instance. Some products have 0 tariff, and some products have 25%. And some are made with more steel than less, and so there's really, no rhyme or reason behind the tariffs, fuel types or componentry, different things could give you a completely different tariff, which is why this is so important, making sure that you have the right HTS codes. But yeah, I think all of that is part of the game that we have to play of how can we manufacture better, and how can we avoid some of those steel, aluminum, or targeted material pieces.
Yeah, that's great. Anything else you would like to add, Bryce?
Yeah, just kind of seconding that. When you look through the actual tariff schedule, there's no real consistency within it, and so just like you were saying, it's really like there's no one size fits all for what should we be focused on or what industries are impacted most, because it really is across all industries, and it's changing very quickly.
And I guess you probably hit that same issue where if you re-engineer your product, you still, future tariffs could change, and that could, be applied to that. And so there's certainly some risk with doing that as well, and some costs. And again, I think it's obviously risky to mess with a product that customers are really happy with. So it's interesting. So one of the reasons why this got brought up is I do M&A advising, and we're working on a deal, and the buyer had a lot of questions. We had to have a lot of discussions around what the potential impact of tariffs would be, because they're trying to identify what's the profitability of this company after we purchase them. And at this point, it's an unknown. And private equity does not like unknowns. And so we've had a lot of discussions about this and these strategies. And so it's certainly, I think, something that brands really need to figure out. And again, it's definitely affecting decisions with the uncertainty that poses there. So, so with that, I mean, we've talked through some of these strategies. Are there anything else? Our leading brands, how are leading brands dealing with this? Are they, these big brands? They're publicly traded companies. They have investors. They have the profits they need to hit, revenues they need to hit. Any other insights into how some of these big brands are dealing with these and how they're handling it?
So I guess, for these large brands, especially the ones that we've been talking to, it becomes just a logistical nightmare. If you have 100,000 SKUs you're managing to 20 different markets, this becomes, to do regular audits becomes a couple, about a $500,000 problem per year, because of the time it takes to go through and reclassify and check each of these goods. So really, it's just a massive headache. You're either outsourcing to somebody that has systems to be able to do this, or you're hiring a massive internal team to go through and keep auditing this. But it seems like a lot of them are they have an internal team that's basically just putting out fires, and besides that, they're just kind of hoping for the best, from what I've seen.
Yeah, I think we saw the Walmart news yesterday that, they're struggling and suffering, and a lot of that was around the tariff conversation. So, it's not just something that impacts smaller brands. It's impacting everyone. And, I think the critical piece is not putting your head in the sand, but looking for the various solutions. There's not a one-size-fits-all tariff, and there's not a one-size-fits-all solution. And you can use multiple solutions. But I think there's partnership with your brokers, there's partnership with trade partners, there's partnership with your suppliers, and there's partnerships with your customers ultimately, where if they're willing to pay a higher price and you can sell it at that, then great. But overall, there's not just a one shoe will fit. You got to look for any creative solutions you can find.
Yeah, from a data source standpoint, again, there are so many unknowns, and obviously the administration can change tactics at whatever point they want. But are there some good data sources or systems, technology that you can utilize to help make some of these decisions?
I guess that's what our entire company is. We have one of the largest databases of trade compliance data in the world, all based on these HTS codes. And so that's really our whole focus is providing all of this data in a simple, easy to consume format. There are other companies, Descartes is a big data provider for this type of information. You can look on like the International Trade Commission website. They have some free tools to use there. The World Bank has a tool called WITS that you can go check out, and it's got some free information there as well. There's a lot of data here, and a lot of it is just finding the right data sources, parsing through that, and then applying it to your goods specifically.
Yeah, first off, I think that was kind of a softball question. Tossed it right up for it, and you're like, oh, well, that's what we do. But no, I think that's great. And having these type of resources are fantastic because, we try to run as lean as we can on the operation side. So we don't have a staff that can just run through these things. So having a partner that would be able to do that and keep us in the loop is fantastic. And we rely heavily on our partners. I mentioned Expeditors earlier, but any broker that you have, they have information, they're getting information. But a lot of these websites and just the news sources that you have, you're going to sometimes hear from news before you'll hear from anybody else. So, I just have the feed, and I had to remove Tariff from my Google search because there's too many. But yeah, we work heavily with our partners. We rely on them for information so that we can continue focusing on the other things we're doing.
That's great. I think the message there is there's certainly there's experts out there, and as a brand, you should go find some of that information and use that to inform your decisions. So with that, I think we've got some time for some questions here. Any questions from the audience? We'll bring a microphone around so we can hear it on the audio. But any questions specifically you have for this group around tariffs? Yeah.
The mic almost feels like overkill in such a small room. Have either of you faced any complicated country of origin issues where parts are coming from one country, being assembled or being packaged in another country that has more favorable duty status? And how do you navigate that to make sure you're compliant with the country of origin rules, but still getting that benefit of importing from some other country that has a lower duty?
Yeah, so that's actually one of the sections on the customs broker exam, and there are certain rules for specific countries, right, like you were saying. So currently we rely on our customers to provide the country of origin, but generally when we're speaking about, you're bringing it in from one country, you're going to another, you're assembling it, and then you're shipping out from that, that would be a tariff code shift from, the part to the finished good. And so that would make the country of origin be that place where you're actually assembling the good. So as a general rule of thumb, but there are exemptions from that. And so you'll have to look at the specific documents for that country of origin documentation, because there are certain goods that are don't fall into those general rules.
Yeah, and there's export tariffs that different companies have as well, and so they want to make sure that they're collecting as much as they can. We are going through this country of origin process right now with several different products and countries. There's a significant transformation is the word that is typically thrown out with country of origin, where you can't just have an assembled product. You can't just send all the parts from somewhere else, assemble it, and then call that the country of origin. There has to be a significant transformation that happens to the product. And so from our side, what we do is we say, okay, what does that look like? We deep draw products, we stamp products, we weld products, we paint products. Which part of those would create a significant transformation, enough to be considered a country of origin change? We've also looked at a reverse country of origin, going back into China for assembly. So that's an option that you could look at as well, getting parts and pieces from other places and then moving it back into China and looking at that. So, yeah, it's big. I would just make sure that you're looking at that significant transformation. That's what any country is going to look at to ensure that they can put their stamp on it. Ultimately, it comes down to the country saying, yeah, we'll take it. Some countries we've talked to want a 30% transformation. Others want a 60%. There's no real guideline on what that looks like. You just have to talk to each one individually.
So that's interesting. So just to clarify, the reverse country of origin would be maybe you're sourcing the raw goods and materials in the United States. They're shipped over to China, assembled in China, and then when it gets brought back, because the country of origin, in theory, from the raw goods is the United States, you're not paying a duty.
You wouldn't pay that full
Okay.
duty, yeah.
Interesting. I hadn't heard that. That's a interesting solution. Anything else? Any other specifics, Stephen?
So Dalen, I'm curious, like how long in your experience has it taken to spin up a new manufacturing capability in a different country? I'm assuming it varies by product, but
Yeah, for sure. Definitely varies by product. I think it depends on who the factory is that you're going with. With Ghazni, we're working with some of the same factories that we already have, so they have the expertise. It's easy for them to send some of their managers or quality control people or production line people to the new country. And so that definitely expedites the process of getting that together. Normally, I'd say you'd probably want a year, 9 months, depending on the product. But you can fast track some things. Just depends on what you're willing to fast track and how you're able to do it. But typically, I'd say a year. The one that I talked about in Cambodia, is ground up literally. So the longest part of the process was building the factory, but getting the product, having the tools, all of that done, and then training the staff. You can do that fairly quickly. Again, depending on the product, like you said. But I would say 9 months is probably a good target. You could probably expedite that to 6 months. If there's less that you have to do, and if you have tools and things already created.
Follow up to that question, but I've heard there's some factory owners in China who are have this foresight to say, let's go build some factories in other countries as well to help get around this, and that way they can continue to be the manufacturer. Are you seeing that? Is that common practice?
Yeah, definitely common practice. I think you'll see China factory owners, all over the globe. You see South Korean factory owners all over the globe. I think in Vietnam, I don't know any numbers, this is all just speculation, but probably the majority are South Korean factory owners. Mexico has a large amount of Chinese factories that have moved businesses over there. So yeah, definitely something that they've seen and they've been doing for years and years.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You're good. We don't get if we don't have the microphone, we don't get the question. So this is good.
Do either of you have any experience identifying some of your competitors that you feel like are not operating in the good light of customs and are bending the rules? And do you have any experience whistleblowing to customs and saying, hey, these competitors on Amazon that I'm competing with are circumnavigating the rules and I can't compete because they're doing things wrong? And if we're experiencing that, what can we do to prevent that from happening?
So yes, there's different places, different things that you can subscribe to. Import Yeti is an example of one that you can subscribe to, and you can find out the locations where these products are coming in from. You can find out the HTS codes that they're using. You can find out a lot of information. I haven't ever been on the whistleblowing side, so I'm not sure who you would contact to do that. But it is an unfair competitive advantage if somebody's not utilizing the right HTS codes or if they're not classifying things correctly. That definitely would hurt your business. So from a information and data collection perspective, there's several different tools that you can use to find out that information. I'm not sure on the actual reporting side of it what you would do, But we use that type of information quite a bit just to see, are we using the same HTS codes? You know, is there something that they're seeing that we're not? And when this 25% exemption kicked in tailed off last July, there were several of our competitors who jumped to different codes. They were with those codes for a couple months here or there, and then miraculously changed back. So interesting to see some of those things and how it goes.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So all of the import records are public information, essentially. Is that how that works with the?
Unless you specify that you want to block that information,
Okay.
which we do.
Yeah, good call. I would think you'd want that private, but it sounds like there's a lot of public information out there. So that's good to know as well. Go if you're importing stuff, go mark that as private, so your competitors aren't getting your data, and you can see theirs. Yeah.
Thanks. So I know nobody in this room can see the future, but discussing the reciprocal tariffs that are taking effect or March 12th, what do you anticipate with that? Specifically, it comes to mind because India's Prime Minister Modi was meeting with President Trump like the day it was announced, and he committed that India was going to buy more military equipment, fight illegal immigration, buy oil and gas, and lower the tariffs into India from U.S. exports. So everything indicates that rate will probably decrease or be zero at some point. Do you anticipate that other countries will do much the same? It just as a tool to get people to the table to negotiate? I guess that's the question. What's the anticipation from both of you?
Yeah, so I guess first off, looking at what these reciprocal tariffs are actually going to be, Trump has announced that it's going to be primarily based on like the value-added taxes for each of these countries, as that's one of the largest impactors in the actual rates. So we have a database of all of that information, each country, what that's going to look like, and I think you're totally on the right track there, where this is to bring other countries to the table, getting the discussion started for lowering those, and so we can be shipping for cheaper into these other countries.
Yeah, I agree. I think when you look at the list of that trade surplus, India's at the top of the list. I think maybe right behind South Korea, but India's right there. And so when you look at what they're trying to do, it's no surprise that he was on a plane as soon as he heard that was happening. And I think it is more of a negotiation tactic. I think Trump has had success with this already, and he's going to continue to have success with it. We're going to have these prime ministers and presidents and kings and whoever getting on his doorstep sooner than later, just to avoid whatever impact that's going to have for them. It's going to be painful, though, if they don't come for
Right.
us and them.
So actually, pivot a little bit, a different question. So Dalen, you mentioned you are transparent with your suppliers. You expect transparency from them when it comes to costing and margins and everything else. How do you assure that? A lot of times I know overseas manufacturers, especially in Asia, can make some of their margin through VAT refunds and other methods. Is it just because you've got a long-standing relationship and when you share, they share back, and there's mutual trust? Or how do you, what kind of mechanisms do you look for to assure that they're not hiding some of their profits?
Yeah, that's a great question. Not necessarily long-standing relationships, although I do enjoy having long-standing relationships. I know them and they know me, and we don't have to train each other on what we like to see. That rhymed, Tyler. And Tyler can see in the future, by the way. But I think we go down as detailed as we can from a costed BOM perspective, and we're seeing every line item that equals that FOB price that we're getting. So I may not know 100% what's in their overhead cost, but I do know that they have an overhead cost, and I do know that typically that's going to be XXX, and we can see what that is. We also certify all of our sub-suppliers, so we know the costs that are coming into the factory for the different parts. And so for us, it's really visibility and transparency into all of that BOM perspective, and getting a full costed BOM that equals that total price that you're paying. And then it's going back and, that costed BOM, we're adding margins into it. We're adding everything into it. And so going back and saying, okay, they're coming to us and saying, hey, our electrical bill went up. We're going to need to adjust this or this. That's the type of level that we can get, where we even know what their overhead fees are, and we can say, okay, that's great. We're going from an RMB to US perspective, and sometimes the RMB's not as great as it has been, and so we're going to that level as well. We're looking at the steel indexes. There's just a lot of things that we look at, and they look at that with us. And so that's just part of the requirements of doing business with us, is they know that we're going to ask for that. And it helps them on their side too, because they know what we're making. They can see our prices online wherever they go. They know what we're buying for, so they know what those margins are. And we share kind of our overhead and what we have to end up with to maintain profitability for our company. And that's just what we expect from them as well.
That's great. Yeah, sounds like a true partnership, which I think is probably the best way to do the business. So I like that. That's great. Well, that's the end of our time here. I think these two will stick around. Dale and Bryce, thank you so much. So helpful, so informative. If you've got any other questions, please feel free to reach out to them. I'll volunteer their time. But again, we thank you very much. Very helpful.